Welcome! Welcome to another episode of GM Musings. My name is Alex, and today we will be talking about magical items, magical artifacts, and how to use them in your campaigns. Now, artifacts are great and beloved by both game masters and player characters. Firstly, because they are magic, and magic is always cool, and secondly, because they are neat gifts. They can be great rewards for the player characters if they accomplished things. They can make them stronger, and they can serve to make the campaign more epic. However, magical artifacts have the potential to be more than just fancy little toys that make the player character stronger. There are several ways you can achieve the feeling that your artifacts are more than just something that increases the stats of your player characters. Firstly, you can give them cool names and unique appearances. If you just find a very sharp blade of striking +1, that's not particularly interesting. I mean, it makes the player character stronger and the player will still be happy to have it, but it doesn't really play with the imagination. It doesn't give the world anything as such. It doesn't make your world seem cooler for it. What you can instead do, say for instance, take this sword that we found, the short sword of striking, and give it a name like, say, the Dawnsinger blade. Now, this is more of a unique name, and your player characters might start to think, I wonder why this name is attached to this sword. Why is it connected to the dawn? Does it make noise? Does it sing? Has it been created by someone called the Dawnsinger or the Dawnsingers? And give it a unique appearance. A blade forged of a special metal, gemstones of a very specific kind. The shape of the grip might be like the shape of a specific creature, maybe a siren or a harpy or something along those lines. And the blade itself might have a unique shape. Say our Dawnsinger blade might even have a changing appearance. Maybe it is dull silverish metal, looks fairly ordinary for most of the day, but as the sun rises above the horizon, it actually catches the sunlight, starts glowing, maybe vibrating, and maybe humming a song to greet the dawn. Now, one of the most important things about your artifacts that you're using in your games is, of course, the powers that they have. Especially for those artifacts that are very powerful, you can add quite a few neat little twists to such powers. Say an artifact is extremely powerful, can unleash extreme destruction upon its enemies, but make its charges limited. The artifact is very old, it has been used over and over again, and maybe it only has enough magic left to 2 or 3 uses. This way you can give your player characters an extremely powerful artifact, but it will not end up being used in every single fight for the rest of your campaign, because the player characters will be aware that they can only use it if absolutely necessary. Another way is to make an artifact only usable in very specific circumstances or at very specific times. So maybe you have a magical item that produces music and it is very well suited to soothe and calm someone's nerves. But it takes a while to take effect, so it's useless in a fight, but it might be very interesting in intense negotiation situations to take a little bit of aggression out of the room, so to speak. An artifact might only be used at specific times of the day. Maybe it unleashes its full power only at dawn, only at dusk, or only when the sun is up high, or maybe only during the night. It can be attached to specific times of the year. Maybe an artifact is only at its full power during winter, or maybe it's only at its full power during a very sunny day, or maybe it draws upon the power of a rainstorm. Maybe it can channel the winds, but only if there are already strong winds blowing. Or maybe an artifact is connected to a very specific type of geographical location. An artifact might only be able to be at its full height, so to speak, in a mountain range or in a forest. With that sort of thing, you will bring your players to act strategically. Maybe they will try to draw the enemy into a mountain range or to fight them there. Or maybe they will try to draw out the conflict until the sun sets and their artifacts are at their full power, adding another little twist of strategical thinking to your campaign. Another trick is to make items extremely powerful, to have their uses be not quite as obvious. Maybe you have an artifact that can have a forest grow in a spot within just a few hours. That sort of thing can be of great use in very specific circumstances, and it can also provide your player characters with resources even, or a city that they are ruling or that they are camping at, provide even the city with resources. Or maybe an artifact can summon a storm. That sort of thing is not obviously useful in fights, but it can be great to prove your own power. I mean, very few things say, look at my magic, I'm awesome, like being able to summon a thunderstorm. Or you can use it to wreck an enemy fleet in specific circumstances and kill hundreds, if not thousands of enemies with it. Last but not least, you can have the powers of your artifacts change and grow through the campaign. Maybe the longer a player character is connected to an artifact, the better known it becomes to him, and the deeper he can draw upon its powers, thus leveling the artifact up as the player character also levels up. Or maybe an artifact requires certain deeds to become powerful. Maybe you have to defeat specific enemies, and the artifact can take some of their power and make that power your own. Finally, I would like to say that you should always strive to keep magic magical. With that, I mean, never tell your player characters, here is the sheet, it has all the magic and all the rules for this artifact, and that's exactly what it does. Especially if an artifact has multiple uses and is powerful. Try to keep some of the usage of an artifact's power a little mysterious, and thus the player characters will never quite know 100% what the magic exactly is, leaving a sense of mystery and, well, magic behind. For instance, the artifact that summons a storm might damage with lightning strikes and wind whoever is in the storm, but don't write down it does 10d6 lightning and wind damage to everyone caught within it. Make the player characters find it out in the game. Maybe the storm is strong enough to kill simple enemies, but some very strong enemies might survive it. Another way to add depth to your magical items is to give them history. Now, some magical items, some artifacts that your player characters might get, could be very new, but most of the time in fantasy settings especially, artifacts that are found are part of some sort of old civilization, maybe a civilization that disappeared, or maybe they have been created hundreds of years ago and stolen or liberated from a tomb or some other old ruin and such. And thus, these old artifacts might have a history. The easiest way to include history of the artifact into your campaign is to have a former owner show up. Maybe, or a group of owners. Maybe an artifact has been owned by a noble house, and that noble house will do whatever it takes to get it back, for it is a symbol of their house. And other noble houses have been gossiping about the loss that happened a couple years ago, and the noble house might have lost standing in the eyes of their peers because they are not capable of reclaiming this artifact. Or maybe it is been created by some evil, powerful wizard, and he needs it for a ritual, and now the player characters have it, and he wants it back really badly. Another way to do it is tie your artifact into existing history and culture. The artifact might be a symbol to some people. Maybe the one who draws this sword will become the next King of England, or something along those lines, if you know what I mean. Maybe specific creatures are terrified to face the wielder of a certain artifact. Even though a magical weapon might not be that overwhelmingly strong, it might have been used to slay the greatest and toughest champions of the orc tribes in the area, and every orc has heard the legends and will instantly recognize this. Therefore, if you wield this artifact against orcs, they will be very hesitant to approach and fight you, and might even flee at the first sight of this artifact, even though the artifact itself, just rule-wise, isn't specifically powerful. An artifact might be a symbol to some people. It might even grant rights or titles. The holder of this magical ring might also be the owner to an old castle by the sea. Or even more, the wielder of a weapon or the wearer of an armor might automatically also be the king's champion, therefore having rights but also having responsibilities. The artifact might affect the world in other ways. It might have been made for other hands. Say it is an elvish blade, and the elves would consider everyone wielding that blade who is not an elf to be an extreme insult to their culture and their race. While they might not openly attack you if you do so, it might cost you a lot of brownie points with the elves. Finally, the very fact that an artifact is powerful and the player characters have it might mean that they need the power of that artifact to survive, because others will be coming after them and trying to steal or claim such an artifact by force. So the sheer fact that they have a powerful artifact leads them to needing the power of that artifact to defend it. Especially with very powerful artifacts, it can be a good idea to have drawbacks added to it. Now, your player characters might not always like that sort of thing, but hey, it can't always be sunshine and rainbows, right? Some artifacts might impose restrictions upon their wielder. Maybe a specific blade needs to be bathed in blood every single day, otherwise it will lose its power and maybe even turn against the wielder. That sort of thing might lead a, not quite morally high-standing character to become a mass murderer, a serial killer. Or another artifact, something that has been wrought by the powers of good and truth, might not permit its wielder to lie, or it might enforce in some ways upon its wielder to need to uphold all his promises. Or maybe it will punish the wielder if it is used against innocents. Now, what an innocent is determined by the weapon and might not always be understood. Some items might be dangerous to use. The One Ring in Lord of the Rings that Bilbo and Frodo are using is extremely powerful. It can turn you invisible. But at the same time, every time you use it, Sauron, the Dark Lord, knows where you are. It can see you, and he will send his minions to reclaim the artifact and attack you and attack the group. Adding something like that to your campaign might be very interesting, and therefore the player characters can have a very, very powerful artifact, but might nonetheless hesitate to use it. The use of an artifact might even weaken the character or demand blood. Maybe the character takes damage every time he uses the artifact, or maybe the artifact attacks him spiritually or physically, drains his life force, literally. Therefore, using the artifact too often might end up killing the character. So he has to carefully think about in which circumstances he will be trusting in its power and in which he will not use it. Some magical artifacts might be addictive. Every time you use it, you might want to use it more. The power itself could be addictive, but also something more about it. Maybe it is an artifact that produces beautiful music, and everyone who hears it only wants to listen for the rest of his or her days to that music. Some art items, like swords or weapons in general or armors, might be jealous. They might not allow you to wield any other weapon or wear any other armor while you are connected to them. And last but not least, of course, you can add sentient and sapient weapons. Weapons that are by themselves, or artifacts, not necessarily weapons, that are by themselves a fully fledged NPC with its own goals and its own personality. And that those sorts of artifacts might seek to force a player character to do their bidding or negotiate an exchange of services to have the group advance its own goals, whatever they might be. Now let me know in the comments what magical artifacts you have used in your campaigns, what magical artifacts you have given to your players, what magical items you have received from your game master, and let me know which ones of those you liked the most, and tell me why. What is it that made those items so beloved by your character or by your player characters? Was it just because they were powerful, or was there something more to it? As always, if you enjoyed this content, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel below. And until we see each other again, good luck on your own games, stay safe, and I will see you around. Bye bye.